Welcome to the Talent Empowerment Podcast, my friends, where we support business transformation and share the stories of great CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, and leaders of all backgrounds so you can borrow their vision, their tools, their tactics to lift up your organization, your teams, and your community. I'm your host, Tom Finn, and on the show today, we have the President and Chief Executive Officer of TARGEGEN Pharmaceuticals, which is a NASDAQ-traded stock, Dr. Charles Theuer. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Well, let me introduce you to Charles. Dr. Theuer has served as the TARGEGEN Pharma President, Chief Executive Officer, and member of their board all the way back to 2006. Now, prior to that, he was the Chief Medical Officer and VP of Clinical Development at TARGEGEN, Inc., a biotech company. Now, prior to joining TARGEGEN, he was the Director of Clinical Oncology at a small little firm called Pfizer. You may or may not have heard of them, where he led the clinical development for Sutent, which is approved by the U.S. FDA for the treatment of advanced kidney cancer. So thank you for your work in developing that life-saving drug. Now, if you want to know about his background in terms of education, he's got a BS from MIT, an MD from the University of California, San Francisco, a PhD from the University of California, Irvine, and his previous research involved immunotoxin and cancer vaccine development, translational work in cancer patients, and gastrointestinal cancer epidemiology. So an impressive track record of excellence serving others. I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you very much for your deep research in cancer and drug discovery and distribution. Thank you for your work there.
Very kind of you, Tom. Thank you.
Well, let's jump right in and start with the role that you play today as a CEO of TARGEGEN Pharma. What's your vision for the organization?
Well, first of all, great to be here, Tom. And what we do at TARGEGEN is, I think, very important and very unique. So we're a biotechnology company. We're focused on trying to transform the care of cancer patients, and especially cancer patients with rarer tumors, where they might be overlooked in terms of drug development programs by big pharma companies, and where the standard of care, the current available treatments for those patients don't provide much benefit. So as an example, our main focus currently is sarcoma. It's a rare tumor of the connective tissues. And for example, our lead program is trying to reset the standard of care for those patients because their current available therapy in terms of an FDA-approved therapy in the refractory disease setting has a very low response rate and is a very poorly tolerated drug. It's very similar, if you will, to what we did at Pfizer with the Sutent program. At the time when we developed Sutent at Pfizer, the standard of care for advanced kidney cancer patients was also very toxic, had a minimal response rate, and Sutent really transformed the standard of care for those patients. So in a similar vein, we're trying to execute this similar type of strategy at TARGEGEN, in this case, focusing on patients with advanced sarcoma.
And has that been something you've been working on for many years? You've served in your role since 2006. Has it taken this long to get something out in the market?
It's a great question. So biotech industry is an industry where there are great successes, but then there are also failures. And most drugs that start clinical development don't succeed. And for example, we had that experience in 2019. We were focused also on sarcoma, on a rarer sarcoma called angiosarcoma, which is a sarcoma that's of the blood vessels that is also, unfortunately, a deadly tumor. And we were executing a large phase 3 trial, and unfortunately, the drug didn't deliver in terms of achieving the endpoint. And so we had to reset ourselves, and fortunately, we were able to license another drug candidate, in this case, a drug candidate with a proven mechanism of action, which lowers the risk of development. And now we're back into what we call a pivotal study, or a study designed to generate the safety and efficacy data that will result in drug approval. And part of that story, Tom, relates to our business model and the way we do development, that we could quickly reset our company and move from a failed drug program into a drug program with a much higher probability of success. And that relates to how we execute our business strategy, which I'm happy to go into as well.
Well, I think that's a really interesting conversation, and primarily driven by the fact that most organizations, when they have a particular drug and it fails, cease to exist afterwards. So that would be the typical business model is we worked on our drug for many years, we got some investors, we moved it forward as best we could, and we found out actually, no, there isn't a solution today for that particular case. So help us understand from a leadership perspective what you did, how you were able to pivot, and how the organization is still working.
No, great question. So what we did at TRACON that was really unique in our industry, and we've been doing this for about 10 years, is we reset the paradigm of drug development. And in a sense, we changed our reliance on a group of contractors that most companies use that are called clinical research organizations. So to kind of understand this concept, you have to think about how's a drug developed. So usually a biotech company, as you said, has investors. They invest in the company. A new drug is discovered, and it's studied in animals. But now you have to show it works in people. And most companies don't have the infrastructure expertise to conduct their own clinical trials. And they outsource those to contract research organizations, or CROs. The issue with that is that CROs are not looking necessarily to do, the issue with that is that CROs are their own profit centers, right? They're looking to make money as everyone else is that's a service provider in the pharmaceutical industry. And the way CROs make their money is, in a sense, I believe, kind of egregious. And I think it destroys value in our industry, and I'll tell you why. So a CRO is looking to bid to win, to get a contract from a pharmaceutical company, but then they're looking to manage to profit. They're looking to make as much money as they can to execute that contract. And the way they get paid is fee for service, like you pay a lawyer.
Sure.
Then they get a sweetener. They get a guaranteed monthly project management fee no matter what happens. In other words, if they do no work that month, they still get paid. Now imagine you ran a business like that. You get paid if you do work, fee for service, but you decide to take a month off, you also get paid. You can see that for a CRO executing a clinical trial contract, the longer that trial takes, the more money they will make. So in my view, it's no surprise that when a pharmaceutical company hires a CRO, many times there are cost overruns, the timelines are delayed, and sometimes there are serious quality issues. So those three critical items that are so important to a biotech company: do the trial on time, do it at cost, the cost of the contract, and do high quality research, in many cases are not well served by contracting with a CRO. So 10 years ago, TRACON internalized all those capabilities into our platform. We call it the product development platform.
So if this is a big issue in the pharma space, why has nobody, or maybe I'm incorrect, maybe people do this, they bring it in-house, but why hasn't this sort of spread, and why are CROs not out of business?
It's a great question. It's funny. 30 years ago, most pharma companies did their own trials with their own team. And the issue was that if you have all these people and all these systems in your company and you do a big trial, and then maybe there's not a next big trial to do, what do you do with your people and those systems? So it made sense for CROs to kind of fill that void. They could do a big trial for Pfizer, and then when that trial is done, they could do a big trial for Novartis. And when that trial is done, they could do a big trial for Bayer. So it seemed to actually be an economical use of resources to serve the pharmaceutical industry. The issue was that the industry became incredibly reliant on CROs, and the reimbursement became this model of fee-for-service plus guaranteed payment models that, in my view, it creates the wrong incentives for the service provider, in this case, the contract research organization. So the pendulum swung from way over here to the left, if you will, all the way to the right. But it is coming a little more to center. So TRACON's not the only company that realizes by doing your own trials with your own team, you can save incredible amounts of capital. There's a company called CGen, very successful company that also does their own trials with their own team. Another global company called Beijing, similar, does their own trials with their own team. In fact, more and more companies are starting to move to that paradigm because the cost savings are incredible. And the other thing that's probably even more important is the time savings. You know, if you're doing your own trials with your own team, you're clearly not making money off yourself. So you have no incentive to see the trial go slowly. So when you do your own trials with your own team, not only do you save in capital, but you also save in timing, which is probably the most important benefit in terms of the value of a potential asset. The ultimate irony, Tom, is that the companies that hire CROs know they can't just, if you will, let the CRO do the trial in an unsupervised fashion. So they still hire a team internally that I call the police force that polices the CRO. So the ultimate irony, in my view, is that people ask me, Charles, you do your own trials with your own team. You must have all these extra people compared to another pharmaceutical company. And I say, no, actually, I have the same number of people. It's just these people actually implement the trial instead of policing a CRO that you then pay to actually implement the trial. So these other companies, ultimate irony is they double pay. They pay their own team to police a CRO. They pay in an egregious manner, if you will, through that fee-for-service guaranteed payment model to actually execute the trial.
Yeah, so if you're not in the pharmaceutical industry, I think you can follow this conversation pretty clearly, primarily driven by the fact that this is a conversation about insourcing versus outsourcing.
Yeah.
And it really is the model of the CEO to look at the variables, including time to market, including the outflow of money, including the contractual obligations, the headcount, the turnover, as you mentioned, right? And then being able to smooth that out over a period of time is really the role of the chief executive of the company. And I thank you for explaining it so clearly. So for the layman out there,
yeah,
we think about this and we go, okay, so you're insourcing your drug development, you're not outsourcing anymore, fine. Why does this stuff take so long? Why does it cost so much?
It's amazing when you think about the dynamic of how the money is kind of parlayed when you develop drugs. So I'll give you an example. There are three players when you develop a drug, in a sense. There's a sponsor, the biotech company, whose goal is to market that drug. Most times there's a CRO middleman who's actually the service provider implementing the trial. And then there's actually the site. The site's actually doing the work. They're the ones enrolling the patient, treating the patient, gathering the data from that patient's experience with the drug, and then feeding it back through the CRO to the sponsor. So right now, if CROs are making their bid price, Tom, for every $6 a sponsor is paying, about $5 is going to a CRO and about $1 is going to the site. In many cases, the CRO doesn't make their bid price because of the incentives we talked about. There's no alignment, that they make more money the longer trial takes. So they'll typically go over the bid price. And then the dynamic may be, $8 or $9 to the CRO, $1 to the site out of the coffers of the sponsor. So my view is the biggest issue in terms of drug development, and we know the biggest cost is the actual conduct of clinical trials. And when I say the biggest cost, let me put that in perspective. The average cost to approve a single drug in this country is about $2.5 billion. Now, why is that? There are actually two reasons. One is, as we talked about earlier, even in our own experience, many drugs fail. So when one drug gets approved, there are probably about 9 others that failed somewhere in that process. So you take all that money, in addition to the money to get the drug that was approved to market, that's about $2.5 billion. But even the drug that was approved that was in a sense a success, that may still cost $500 million to get to market because of the cost of implementing trials to the CRO model. Now, TARGEGEN, as an example, we know we can beat a CRO bid price not just by a margin, but we can do it for about a third the cost of a typical CRO bid price. Think what that would mean for our industry. You basically could develop 3 drugs for the price of every one. Think what that would mean potentially for even drug pricing. So that's why we're so committed to our model. And we don't just want to use it for our portfolio of drug candidates. We really want to help transform the industry and teach others or help them benefit from our knowledge and our platform. So as an example, we're willing to teach others to do drug development the TARGEGEN way. It's sort of like a franchise model. We call it giving away the keys to the kingdom. So we definitely would require a capital investment from a potential partner to learn our secret sauce, so to speak. But if they did that, for that upfront investment, they would then have the keys to the kingdom to be able to run trials like TARGEGEN does, literally at a third the cost they're probably paying a CRO. And then there's one other variation on that theme I'll talk about, which sometimes companies don't want to invest in the infrastructure to do trials themselves. But we'll also potentially help we'll also potentially help companies avoid what I call the CRO quicksand of that fee-for-service guaranteed monthly payment model. And we'll do trials replacing a CRO for another company. But if we do a trial, we do what we call pay for performance. And if we think about what that means, it's really going back to that paradigm I talked about with respect to sponsor, CRO, and site. If you think about the clinical site, they get paid only when they enroll a patient. Our view is the sponsor should only pay the service provider or CRO in the same manner. If they enroll a patient, they get paid. If they're sitting on their hands, they shouldn't get that guaranteed monthly payment. So we do pay for performance when we replace a CRO for a partner. We get paid based on accruing patients, the same way a site does. And you think about that, that incentivizes us to do the trial on time, because if we sit on our hands, we're not getting paid. So our capabilities is something that's really important to us as an internal company, but we would love to teach others to avoid that zero trap in either of those two mechanisms, franchise model or the pay-for-performance model, to align incentives and have everyone on the same page, which would lower costs and increase the pace of drug development.
So I love that you're implementing different business models and experimenting with different partnerships to expand your reach, because I think that just makes all the sense in the world when you've figured out a little bit of a secret sauce that can help the whole industry. That's really terrific that you're taking that path. So I've got a couple of questions though. If I'm a competitive pharma distribution drug maker and I'm going through my clinical trials, why on earth would I want you to know exactly what I'm doing? Isn't there some level of competition? Don't we want some sort of wall between these organizations?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. So, where our focus really right now is almost exclusively in sarcoma. So, that's one area that we wouldn't do a trial in most cases with a company that's directly competing with us, say, to approve a drug in sarcoma. But in oncology, there are about 20 to 30 different types of cancer. Now, we've done trials across 10 to 12 indications. So if there's a cancer type that's out there, likely we've done studies there and we know the investigators in those fields. So we'd be happy to do a trial in an area where we're not focused, or the mechanism of action of the drug is different than ours, which is generally the case. And in the case of the franchise model, we could teach that to anybody. They could be a cancer company, they could be a rare disease company, they could be a more common disease company, like focused on high blood pressure drugs or diabetes drugs, because that's really teaching someone the platform, the tools about how to do trials yourselves, which is agnostic to what the indication is. So you can do it for the franchise model very easily by teaching someone to do it themselves. And it's kind of like that tale, give a man a fish, feed them for a day, teach a man to fish, they can feed themselves for a lifetime. So that's what the benefit of that franchise model is. For the pay-for-performance, we'd have to be more careful about who we pick, but there's so many different areas in oncology or even non-oncology we could do trials for the partner in place of a CRO that there really wouldn't be the issue of competition or conflict of interest.
So does this broaden out your product offering? I mean, what I'm hearing is 3 different revenue streams with 3 slightly different business models, all contained under the same umbrella in a smart and thoughtful way for the industry. But to me, I'm hearing 3 revenue streams. Is that where you're going?
It really is. So our focus is we have a drug that's in a late stage clinical trial. We hope to commercialize that drug in 2 years. And that's our expected key revenue stream starting in 2025. But in the meantime, we can support ourselves through non-diluted capital by leveraging our platform, either in the franchise model or the pay-for-performance model. So it really is using your capabilities to generate income into your company that supports your primary business thesis, which for us is transforming the standard of care for cancers, especially cancers that are rare and underserved by current therapies. So it does all kind of wrap into one dynamic. We use our platform to develop our own drugs to market at incredibly low cost. But then we can also, to your point, leverage that platform to create revenue streams for non-diluted capital that serves the primary goal of the company, which is to commercialize drugs for unmet need indications.
Yeah, and for those of you that are thinking about the term non-diluted capital, that's one of my favorite terms. That just means that you've created enough revenue for your company that you don't need investors to take out large chunks of the organization and give you big piles of cash to keep you burning through it as you develop your drug or product or service or whatever it might be. My favorite term in business is non-diluted capital. As a founder myself, Charles. So well said. So let's pivot a little bit and just get into your background and your leadership style and the way you approach the business, because you've got such depth of education and knowledge in the industry, but it probably wasn't always this way. Tell me about the time that you decided, I'm going into the hard sciences, I'm going to medical school, this is my path.
Sure. Yeah, I always really enjoyed science, Tom. Even as a kid, I remember writing my essay for college, and I think I started off with, I've always enjoyed science, and I always have. Always enjoyed kind of understanding how things work and how things interplay, and so that was always just of great interest to me. And, I pursued that in college, and then, I think you think about medical school as kind of a natural continuation of an interest in science. And, I did enjoy medical school. And I guess when you think about going to medical school versus, say, a straight research path in biology, for example, I did also really relish the potential to have a doctor-patient interaction and talk to people and understand, what's going on. And, if a patient comes to you, they have a problem you really need to help with, not just from a scientific perspective, but also from a very humane perspective. So I really relished that. And that was really the reason I probably went to medical school as opposed to a straight, say, PhD in some science field. And then I went into surgery. So I was a cancer surgeon for many years and really enjoyed cancer surgery. And I was working on patients, that have advanced tumors, but in many cases, you can actually still cure the tumor. So, for instance, most breast cancer patients, we cure those patients. It's relatively early stage, and, it's very satisfying when you cure cancer. Even in most cases, say GI cancer, like colon cancer, the ones that go to the operating room, many times you cure those patients. So it's a very satisfying career in that sense that you can talk to a patient and say, we're doing a surgery, and when that surgery is over, you can look at them and say, the chance of you having recurrent cancer is as high as you going home and getting in a car accident today. It's that low that you really can make an impact in a patient. And it's a one-to-one interaction, and you interact on a patient-by-patient basis. And that's fantastic. But then you also see the cases where you can't help. The cancer's too advanced, the surgery's not enough, radiation therapy's not enough, chemotherapy's not enough. And that's what kind of drove me into the pharmaceutical industry, that if you make an impact and approve a new drug, you can have a global impact potentially. We saw that with Sutent as an example, the drug you profiled that we approved at Pfizer. And that drug literally transformed the care of kidney cancer. It took a population that had maybe a chance of responding of like 4% and really increased that by 7 times with the drug Sutent. So, those are the great success stories that really empower you and sustain you to continue to develop drugs in this industry.
So did you always start out this confident when you were in high school and college and you're in your were you always this confident and composed, or did you have to go through some learning processes yourself along the way?
Oh, definitely a lot of learning processes. I mean, I think surgery is a great teacher. For me personally, I mentioned the success stories, but no surgeon is perfect, and you'll have some complications along the road, and that's a way to look inside yourself and manage success, but also manage failure. So for me, I think the greatest teacher I had was surgery, because you're interacting with people. You do everything you can to help them. Sometimes it's not enough, and you always do your best. And I always said the best way to treat a patient is just treat them as though they're a family member. And if you take that paradigm, that really works well. And that helps you get through the failures. They're not very often, but sometimes, surgery won't go exactly as planned. But you always do your best by the patient, and that helps you grow personally. And I think that was probably my greatest teacher.
I always think that the intimacy between a surgeon and a patient is really underestimated by the general public, because there is a level of intimacy there, and it happens really fast. You go in, you go to pre-op, you end up having a conversation. Yep, you're my guy or my gal. Okay, we're in. We're scheduled. You're there. You've got a great team in the front room getting you set up. You're in surgery. You're out. You're in post-op. But it's fast, but it's very intimate. If you think about the relationship between those two people, it can be life-changing, as you mentioned. Did you feel that way when you were a surgeon? Oh,
absolutely, Tom. Yeah, it's amazing when you kind of think about it. I mean, what is a patient really doing when they interact with a surgeon? It's so intimate, to your point. I mean, they're really giving that surgeon permission to operate on them, to cut their skin and change their lives, and to your point, as intimate a way as you can imagine, right? And that's a bond. I mean, when you operate, it's funny that the hard part of surgery is you never can really go on vacation, because once you operate on a patient, that is your patient forever, right? And that, most times it's like you do the surgery, it goes well, and you may not see that patient again because it's a complete success. But, you operate on cancer patients, sometimes the cancer does come back, and, that's still your patient forever. So it is an incredibly intimate association. And, the patients that you operate on, they become a little bit like a surrogate family to you. And yeah, it's a big part of defining who you are is how you interact with those patients and kind of can work with them kind of potentially for a very, very long time, for many, many years. Yeah, it was a beautiful part of the doctor-patient relationship, and surgery I always thought was the ultimate intimacy, in the sense that, you know, you can always prescribe drugs to patients and medicines, but, you know, surgery gives you this arsenal of tools that really can impact a patient in a way that no other discipline can. And the ultimate is when it's curative surgery. In case of cancer, that's gratification for you and the patient is just incredible.
Yeah, well said and well documented there. Thank you for your thoughts around it. I'm wondering, when you were going through this process and you were thinking about leaving surgery, this is a big decision,
Yeah.
to pivot into pharmaceuticals. Now, you didn't go into real estate, which you probably could have, or you didn't decide to design a cruise ship. You decided to stay in the same or similar industry, but that's a pretty big pivot from daily surgery into a leadership role. How did that happen for you? What was the mental process you went through? What was the mindset you had to make that pivot?
Yeah, great question, Ty. It was a tough decision. You know, surgery was beautiful in terms of that intimate interaction you mentioned with the patient and the impact you could have on that individual patient. And you could do that on a repeat basis, you know, every week. But I think what pushed me into a more general field, if that's the right way to say biotech, is that for localized tumors, you know, you could cure those tumors. It was incredibly gratifying. But then you also saw those patients with advanced tumors where you sometimes operate for, like, to prevent a complication of the cancer, but you knew you couldn't cure the cancer. And in those cases, nothing else could. And the opportunity to go into the biotech field was the opportunity to advance the entire field that could then have a global impact on those patients that you couldn't cure with surgery in and of itself. So that's probably was the deciding factor for me.
And I think this is a process many of us go through, which is you go into a particular field and you have some success and you build your network and you gain some confidence. And then you broaden out and you do a little more in that field, and you broaden out and you do a little more. Maybe it's education, maybe it's training other people, maybe it's speaking at conferences, and you start to broaden out a little bit. And then you hit a point where you say, have I capped myself? At a certain point, am I not doing enough for society? Am I not doing enough for fellow man? Should I be doing more? And what I think I hear, if I'm articulating this correctly, is at some point you hit a cap and said, I love my experience. I love what I'm doing with patients, but there's something more I can do to impact the world in a meaningful way. Is that the way you look at this process too?
Tom, that really hits the nail straight on the head. So, you know, one of the things I was saying to myself when I had the opportunity to go into the biotech field is, you know, in surgery, what I'm doing this week, and if I look 20 years in the future, what I'm doing that week, to your point, may not be that different, which is kind of plays into what you're saying. You've kind of capped your learning in that field. And so biotech was also the opportunity to make a more global impact, but also enlarge kind of your personal growth. Go into a field that you were going to learn many new concepts and personally enrich yourself. So well said, very well said.
So as you think about your leadership style and the way that you manage and you bring on people and you develop them, is there a teacher that you have met along the way that's influenced you, or have you developed your own tools and tactics and leadership style?
It's a great question. So I think that the leaders that influence me the most, and I try to emulate in terms of leadership style, are mainly historical figures. Like I'm a big Abraham Lincoln fan. So you think of someone who, in biotech, you know, has its ups and downs. To be clear, it's not all roses. They're tough cycles. They're boon cycles, but there's some tough times too. And you think of Lincoln and how he persevered through, say, incredibly stressful times. You know, that's to me is a role model. Someone who's, you know, humble, who thinks, you know, very logically, doesn't get too emotional about certain items, and leads, in this case, a nation through a potential division to preserve the Union. That's a role model to me. Right now, I'm reading a little bit on Churchill. Churchill, you know, leading through the Battle of Britain, right? You know, people thought, oh gosh, Germany's just going to run right over Britain the same way they ran over France. And, you know, is that leadership to persevere in you know, the darkest hour, right? And to now get past that into a victory 5 years later. those are kind of leaders that inspire me. I've always thought if you can know every quote that Lincoln made or Martin Luther King made, you probably have every quote you ever need to think about to kind of get through life. So he's another great leader for me, is Martin Luther King. So the three of them probably have said everything that needs to be said that you can draw on for inspiration through life. In terms of my leadership style at TRACON, I think the most important thing we do at TRACON is we bring on great people. I'll give you an example. Our Chief Operating Officer, Bonnie Adams, it was her brainchild to really create the product development platform. This platform, we're doing our own trials with our own team and using the most technologically advanced systems to do it. That's our focus at TRACON, not just see things the way they are, but see things the way they could be and then move to that direction and make it happen. There's another great quote I like, is that you can't achieve perfection, but in the pursuit of perfection, you'll catch excellence. And I think that's what we do here at TRACON.
Yeah, well said. And I'd love to know what the conversation looked like when Bonnie came to you and said, Charles, I've got this idea. I've got this great idea. Stay with me. I just need an hour. How did that conversation go? And were you receptive in that first meeting?
It's a great question, Tom. So, very receptive. I mean, we realized, this is back in like 2010, we implemented this model. And, we realized that the standard paradigm wasn't going to work for TRACON, that, we had this broad development plan. If we used CROs, there was no way we could even execute the trials we were proposing. And we had a venture capitalist that was interested in investing in TRACON, but at a fixed amount. And we realized the only way we could deliver on our promises for that amount of investment was to do the trials ourselves at a third of the cost that we would pay a CRO. So, they say necessity is the mother of invention. That was part of it, but we also had the team that knew how to do it from our previous experience at other companies where we actually had done our own trials with our own team. So it was using that experience, meeting a need at TRACON, but then also upgrading systems to the point now where they're just better, if you will, in many ways than the typical CRO systems. And then you have a team that's incentivized through the model we talked about, pay for performance, to do trials to replace a CRO or do our own trials at a third the cost. And so it kind of was that evolution.
And how does it make you feel now that you're leading this company? You've got this cool business model. It's very modern. It's very others focused. It's industry leading. How does that make you feel on a daily or weekly basis?
Yeah, I'm so proud of what we've done here, Tom. I mean, I think we look at drug development as kind of three pieces. It's you discover the drugs, you develop the drugs, and you commercialize the drugs. And we feel at TRACON we develop drugs better than any company in the world. And that makes you feel very proud. Proud of your team, proud of your processes. And our goal is to build those other two pieces, and then we have a fully integrated company that could be the most efficient in this entire industry.
Yeah, well said again. And from all of us that are just regular folks out there, I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. The work that you've done in cancer research and drug development is really astounding. And I think we're all rooting for you and TRACON Pharmaceuticals to really deliver on the promises that you've made to each other as a team and that you continue to make to the market week in and week out. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
My pleasure, Tom, and thank you so much for hosting me on the show.
Well, if somebody wanted to find you, where would they go about doing that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, and then also people are welcome to access charlestheuer.com, and that links to actually a book we wrote. Our team wrote a book called Unnecessary Expense that outlines several of the concepts we talked about here. And the reason we call it unnecessary expense is because we feel most companies or biotech companies, I should say, that use CROs to implement their trials are paying an unnecessary expense, both in terms of capital and time. So either of those are great venues to link in with me, and be happy to meet the listeners on the program.
Yeah, and Charles, we'll put that in the show notes so everybody has direct links to be able to purchase your book, check out your website, and certainly connect with you on LinkedIn. Thank you again for all of the great work that you do.
Thank you, Tom. Really a pleasure.
And thank you for joining the Talent Empowerment Podcast. I hope you transform your business by placing humans at the center, leveraging technology at speed, and enabling innovation at scale. Let's get back to people and culture together. We'll see you on the next episode.